Okay, we're all set. Please go ahead.
Okay. So we're expecting one member to join us, but it's 3:02, so I will call the October 23rd, 2025 meeting of the Community Resources Committee to order. Pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2025, which extends through June 30th, 2027, the ability of public bodies to meet in a remote or hybrid manner without a quorum of members in person, this meeting will be conducted via remote means. Members of the public who wish to access the meeting may do so via Zoom or by telephone. No in-person attendance of members of the public is possible, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. Okay, and with that, again, we'll call the meeting to order and make sure everyone can hear and be heard. Starting with Pat.
Present.
And Councillor Hanneke.
Present.
And I, Jennifer, am present. Okay, so let me see if there's any participants. Okay, there is one participant in the audience, and I will ask if there are any public comments. So I will call the general, there are no hearings at this meeting, and I will call the general public comments portion of the meeting. We will begin if any members of the audience have a comment. And no one is raising their hands. So we will move on to the next agenda item, but first ask Kathy, Shane, if you can hear us.
Yes. Sorry.
Okay, great. It's okay. We're just starting. So the first, and we have with us today, Dave Zomack and Nate Malloy. And we will start. The first item is the item that was just referred to CRC at the council this week, and that's a proposed zoning change, zoning map change for three parcels on Main Street, relating to that we would, the request is to have them become part of the neighborhood business district where they're now part of the general residence district. So, oh, and we have Rob as well. I'm sorry, Rob Mora. Rob, were you going to take this portion? Should we?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so I will turn it over to you now.
Sure. So really the only thing we're here to talk about today is the scheduling of the public hearing and the CRC's availability. As an update, the planning board will be holding their public hearing on November 19th. Looking at dates with Athena, if the committee agrees, a possibility for a hearing with the CRC could be November 20th. And I guess that's what the discussion point is today, if that's possible, and that, that would leave opportunity for GOL and, possible return to the council in December.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Councillor Hanneke.
I mean, that's the earliest meeting we could do it at. So in that sense, unless we're scheduling a meeting the week before, we need to do it then. I don't see how it gets out of GOL by the December 1st meeting where it needs its first reading though, because the next week is Thanksgiving. Does GOL have a meeting the week of November? Because the first reading needs to be December 1. So does GOL have a meeting on either the 24th or the 25th or the 26th of November with Thanksgiving on the 27th? Do we know?
I can look at the calendar, but I need
They
to
have
confirm.
GOL has a meeting on the 25th.
Okay.
Oh, okay. And I know this was a question Kathy asked during the council meeting. We cannot have a joint hearing with the planning board.
I don't think that's going to happen
Okay.
this time. It's we have a November 19th meeting where the planning board is dedicating their entire meeting to zoning articles now. So they will be hearing the petition request as well as this one on the 19th.
Oh, Athena.
Just another quick note, it sounds like this has already gone to legal for review, so we don't anticipate having a long delay before GOL can take it up if CRC has their hearing on the 20th. That's
Oh,
sometimes
thank
a
you.
delay,
That's
but
okay.
shouldn't be in this case.
helpful. Counselor Haneke.
That is very helpful, Athena, so thank you. Just a note, if we do the hearing on the 20th, next week is when the notice probably has to go to the paper, and I don't know when our chair will be back, but Jennifer, it might be wise for you to work with Rob and Athena to make sure that notice goes out next week, because it would need published on the 5th of November. The first
Okay,
one.
thank you, because
And you
I
tend to need
believe,
a week lead.
yeah. Okay, thank you. I believe our chair is coming back on the 30th, so I will work with,
Yeah, because that's probably
Athena.
too late.
yeah. Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
We usually use the same or similar wording as the planning board notice, so we should be able to put that together quickly next week.
Okay. Thank you. So there's no further discussion of the substance of the referral today? Okay,
Correct.
okay. Well, thank you, Rob.
All right, thank you all.
Yeah, we don't need to vote on this. We'll just, yeah, we'll be aiming or having the hearing on November 20th.
See you in a couple weeks. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
We usually notice the hearings at 3:05 rather than 3 o'clock on the dot so that you can open the meeting and so on. So that's what we'll plan for as long as there's no objections here.
No objections? No, that sounds good. Okay, thank you. So, Rob, I don't think there's any other items for you? Is this the
No,
shortest you've ever had to stay at CRC?
Well, I'm going to listen for a little bit, but Nate's taking it from here for the other items, so I'll just turn off my camera.
Okay, thanks. So the next item, on the, agenda is any updates on the solar bylaw, draft regulations, looking to start to think about incorporating the state's regulations in with our bylaw. And with that, I will turn it over to Counselor Haneke and Kathy for an update.
Yep, so it was assigned to me and I am not going to do it all myself. I'm just gonna say that. So I've reached out to Kathy and we have a plan in a sense. But the first thing I did was, and this, Pat, I forwarded it to Pam this morning, forgetting that Pam wouldn't be here, and so then forwarded it to Jennifer asking for a document to be in the packet. But the first thing I did was create a document that puts our current draft bylaw in one column, basically, on one side of the paper, and then I went through the regulations, the guidelines, or most of the guidelines that are in draft form, and then also the model bylaw, and put anything that related to any particular section of that bylaw of what we've done. So like the model bylaw has a purpose for both BESS and solar. And so those are in a column, the same
Yeah, I
row as
get
the
it.
purpose for our bylaw.
Sounds
sort of
good.
thing. And so that document will be in the packet whenever Jennifer or Pam get to it. It is 40 some pages long because, there's a lot, and there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of just information in that, but then it puts everything sort of in one section. It's not really readable. It's not completely usable, but it gives you an idea of where things are and the status of drafts. Kathy and I met, and we think it wise to sort of take that and actually do the opposite of that in a sense, which is to draft a bylaw to present to the committee that uses that sort of takes those individual sections and just merges them or picks one, or then notes where when we've picked some language, whether it was the current language or the language from the model or the guidelines or whatever it be, and say this is where the changes are, or this is what we needed to choose, and things like that, and then come back to the committee with basically a full draft bylaw that would comply with, the model bylaw, makes some decisions that the model bylaw has, complies with the current drafts of the guidelines and all of that, maybe potentially adds some things in and says, hey, we saw these things, maybe they need to go in, things like that. I can't describe it much better than that because this is really a work in progress of how to best present it in a sense. But the goal after looking at it, the model solar and the model BESS have very similar formats and sections. And so one thing we thought to do was to try and just combine them into one bylaw so that you're not, or one article, basically, one full bylaw, so that you're not having to, if you're doing a solar project that happens to have a co-located BESS on it, which many do, you're not referencing 5 different articles or 2 different articles. They're all in the same article. And many of the conditions are the same between the bylaws. So instead of essentially doubling the length of the article, we'll shrink some of it and present it all as one so that we don't have sort of the same purpose reiterated twice practically, or the same applicability section reiterated twice in 2 different bylaws. So the goal is sort of to tackle both. We will be ready to present something in 2 weeks for whatever Kathy and I have each gotten done. We've sort of split the sections out. It probably won't be fully ready for full discussion, but hopefully in 2 weeks we can have a good discussion on whatever Kathy and I have made it through. I will not be at that meeting, so Kathy will take the lead at that meeting on what we've done. Kathy, do you want to add anything?
No, I just want to underscore some of what Mandy said. I mean, what this very long side by side that was all Mandy's work shows you, and what I saw is in some places, we already have identical language in the draft we've been working on. The organization in some cases is extremely similar. The exception would be we have just done placeholders for BESS. So the nice part of what the state has given us is what's the purpose of BESS, what's the language, so there's some new wording that we've gotten. Then the other thing that's notable when you look at what the state has done, they're defining some things that we've never defined, and it's partly because Amherst doesn't necessarily do things. So the example would be consolidated permit. We do that when we do a 40B housing thing, but the consolidated permit concept, as near as I could figure it out, is that all the different entities, Dave, the Conservation Commission, the Planning Board, and others, whoever is in charge of the main permit for the solar installation, gets all of those together for one permit, with the sub pieces, rather than you go here for several months and you go there. So it tries to coordinate in some way. That's the concept that the state has embedded in it. And then they left it for the municipality to figure out how one might do that. But it needs to have the state is insisting on a consolidated permit. So we have to define it and figure out, so there's some they're not oddities, but there's some, what does that mean for Amherst types of areas? So I think that's the main thing I saw when I was independently looking for it. And then, as I mentioned last time, 2 weeks ago, when it was the first time I was looking at these, the state has in the draft model, and I think maybe we should just post those, the regs and the draft model, to the extent others want to look at them, has put large green paragraphs in for permissive language. We didn't do something, but you might want to. And that's where we've already done some of those things, we've addressed them. So I think that was it, what I'd add to Mandy. I mean, there's an interesting section on agrovoltaic that they think of anything that has on the ground a solar array and something underneath it as a canopy, whether that's in your backyard or over a farm. So, sort of wrestling, it's just purely definitional. And then they have an agrivoltaic that's big and one that's small. I mean, so if they thought they were streamlining, they've gone to many more details than we would have had in ours. So trying to just figure out how to incorporate that in, to not, to do what the planning staff had to do on the planning ADUs, some terminology is, if it's in the regs, we need to use those terms. And then things we can do that go beyond what the state said, we've just got to identify them. So that's all I was seeing, that's one of the reasons this document got so long that Mandy did, because there were just terms that we don't even have, definitions of things we haven't defined. So it's, in some cases, you don't have to include everything, like what is site plan review? They've defined everything in theirs. What is a site plan review? What is a special permit? What is a blah, 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 you know? So it's going to, I think it will work if people like the proposal that we would kind of take it and mush it together with a clean draft of something that complies with the state regs and retains everything we've done so far to the extent we have to, other than tweaking words, with a comment section that indicates, the idea with the comment section that indicates this is completely the language we already agreed on. This has been modified in a way, so that's what the product goal is.
Yep,
If-
if I may add one thing, and that product goal will have some questions. You'll see it in the document we created. There's like a section of like, here's some explanation of stuff, and then here's some things we have to answer. Canopies is an interesting one, with agrivoltaics being considered a canopy, because the model bylaw treats canopies as a yes in a use table, no matter the size, unless if it's up to whatever the towns can regulate, it's a yes in the use table. So it could be as big as a farm field, and it would just go to a building commissioner in the model bylaw. And clearly that's not what our plan was. So one of our tasks is to, as Kathy was saying, figure stuff like that out and present something to you all that matches the 2+ years of conversations we've had, but doesn't do that. So we hope to get something. Certainly by the end of the year, we hope we can have something that sort of just sits there until the final regs are adopted, and we can revisit it then. But we'll get something next meeting.
Thank you.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to let Pat have a comment. Thank you. I'm so glad it's you and not me. But, yeah, thank you. That's
Well, both of them
really
love doing
helpful.
this, so we're giving them something they enjoy. Think
Oh.
about it that way.
I will, but I'm glad you enjoy it, because, yeah, thank you. So like when you say that about the canopy, that means that has to be, that's a requirement of the,
Well, they've defined something, Jennifer. So when we said agrivoltaic, that's exactly what we were thinking of. And so it's like, that's a term we could use, but what was at least notable to me, I said, what is agriculture? And they didn't say, you know, a farm that's been farming for X number of years. So could you do a large solar thing and plant one thing underneath it and come in underneath that category? So they made it, you could do those all over the place. You know, as opposed to only certain designated zones, you know, or it's a farm, a thing that's been a working farm for at least X years. You know, so it was just an interesting way they tackled it. And then you could have a large solar installation, ground mounted, over parking lots like UMass. I mean, I'm not sure how many kilowatt hours the UMass is, but they're so extensive on some of them, they probably meet our definition of large. Now, we don't have any jurisdiction over UMass.
Right.
And I doubt well, we've already permitted the new school, but most of the solar is on the roof, and so only part of the parking lot is covered, so that canopy problem. But in any case, the state went to that level of detail of large, not large, canopy, big, large, canopy, both agriculture, not agriculture. They were like looking at all the possible variations of where a solar array might be.
Yeah.
You know, so pad out on Hickory Ridge, if they planted something underneath it, would it suddenly become agrivoltaic? Not clear, you know?
That may not have had to go to any public hearing at all, just to Rob for approval
Yeah.
to meet things,
Yeah, so
right?
in any so
And
it's-
that's not what we were thinking in our conversations, so that's where we have to try and modify what they defined and how they were splitting stuff up and work it to what we were, because we can. We don't have to follow the model bylaw exactly, but those are not easy one-to-one transfers is
Right,
part of
right.
the point.
So I have I don't know if this housekeeping question, but when you asked that what you prepared for today be posted, is that in the public, would have to be in the public packet, not just SharePoint, because we can't look at it
Yeah.
if the public can't?
Yeah, it should go to the public packet, and it doesn't matter if it's today's meeting or 2 weeks from now's meeting. Today, since we talked about it, it should probably end up in today's. It could end up in 2 weeks too.
Okay, I'll leave that to Athena to, make that call. Okay, so is there any other, questions or discussion we want to have on this? I really appreciate the update.
Mandy, I don't think I have the copy. If you wouldn't mind forwarding it to me, that way I can
Oh.
post it.
I'll forward it to you too, Athena. I
Thank you.
went to Pam and then forgot Pam wasn't going to be here. Sent it
Yeah.
to Jennifer.
And I just got it, but yeah.
I'll send it to you too, Athena.
Thank you. Oops.
Okay, so then we can move on to the next agenda item, which is the housing production plan, and Nate is here to join us for that. Hi, Nate.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I guess we can pick up where we left off, or, I could talk a little bit more about, the timeline and what we're hopeful for today and maybe the next meeting, but.
I think that would be helpful, because I even asked you if,
Sure.
there was an expectation of an action today.
Right, and so, when this went to town council and was referred to the CRC, there was discussion about when it should come back to town council, and in the motion, it really was until, their second meeting in November. And so, the council would probably wait until that meeting to take any action on the housing production plan. I think staff would like to encourage, a recommendation, if not today, then the next meeting of the CRC. Really the CRC is making a recommendation to town council to adopt the housing production plan, not adopt it, or possibly adopt it with, amendments or things that you'd want to see changed. The hope really is, though, that this plan would be adopted by the end of the calendar year, by the council term. And so most of it was written a long time ago. And so, at some point it just, it seems like it's, we're working off a completed document, and are there things that are so critical that need to be changed that it can be adopted, I guess is where I'd like to get to. Are there something that is just not, we'd want the consultant to change. And so right now it's the consultant's plan. And so, if we wanted changes, staff would work with them to make those changes. We wouldn't have that ability to change the plan. But we've discussed that with them, that it may come back. And so, really we have 1 or 2 more CRC meetings to discuss, where we would want that recommendation to go, how it would go back to town council.
Thank you. Pat, your hand went first.
Yeah, thank you. Just quickly, you said adopt, not adopt, adopt with amendments. And we got consultants, they did all kinds of public process and everything, and they've written up the report. And I'm trying to understand, and maybe this is for everybody on CRC, why we're not just adopting it. This is, basically we're saying there's been a public process, this is the report on it, and now we're going to change it because we have certain opinions, whatever they are. And I'm feeling like that's a waste of time and energy, when basically this document, we have it from 10 years ago or more, and some of it was implemented, much of it was not, because we have choices. It doesn't lock us into anything. I really feel like this could have been taken care of in one meeting. So that's where I am.
Thank you.
Maybe there's a question in there, Nate. but I don't-
No, I mean, I can reiterate that
Sorry.
this, no, that's fine. I can
My
reiterate that this
frustration
doesn't
is not
obligate.
with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it was, right, the language that the state wants to see is that the town adopts this as the affordable housing plan. And so the planning board has already done that. And then would council be willing
Right.
to do that? And it doesn't obligate the town to do everything in the plan. You know, we
know.
could sit on it. And so really if this moves forward to the state, they'll look at it and see that to form it's good, right? So there's two steps with the state. One is that they approve your plan so that it meets, you know, all the outline and requirements from the general regulations of what needs to be in a housing production plan. And most plans get there. The second step would be to certify it, meaning you've produced the minimum number of units you need to in a 12-month period to then be at safe harbor from a comprehensive permit. So some communities use this housing production plan as a way to try to get to safe harbor, you know, rather than produce the units, or, you know, they can do a plan and try to work that way. Amherst, we're at safe harbor now, so you know,
Right.
really we see it as a nice framework, and it doesn't obligate the town to do everything or anything in the plan.
Right. Yeah, so I feel like we waste a lot of time in this committee.
Kathy?
It's possible, Pat, that we have in the past wasted a lot of time, and I've only been here, as you know, since January. But the amount of time we've focused and discussed this has been minimal. So I have a broader, it's similar to your question. I don't read this as the Barrett report. I read this as the town report and set of recommendations. So I have unfortunately just finished a half hour ago my comments. So if I had to say where my main concerns are on it, I don't think there's enough documentation. There's not a rationale for the number of units that the report recommends that we produce, you know, both as feasible. The data section is fabulous. And I think it has produced an amazing amount of information. The executive summary doesn't summarize some of the findings of the report. I expect an executive summary. It's often an expression of opinion rather than an executive summary. And then in some of that, you miss the context that the report is incredibly rich in, including it's got a paragraph that talks about Amherst as being a leader in everything we've done. And that paragraph is on page 6 of the body of the report, but you never see it in the executive summary. So your question, Pat, is, and then Nate, do we amend it here, since I may be the only one who's concerned about any of this, and, you know, we could take a vote and I would lose. Do I then, at what point do I express it's the nuance rather than the bulk of the report? And I'll give it, you know, so I was page specific in the comments I just sent Nate, and I didn't think I was going to be asking the consultants to do a lot because I thought this was our report. So I may be wrong about whose report it is. If I think of it as our report, meaning the council plus the planning board, I doubt most people had the time to go through every page and cross-do it. So that's all. That's all. So it is with your thing, Pat. Pat, do we have a longer discussion on whether anyone shares my specific concerns? And if no one shares them, then we vote, send the report back as it was presented to us, because clearly I wasn't there when the planning board adopted it. In fact, I was not physically in Amherst for a month, and I missed that period. But I did go, Pat, I did go to multiple of the sessions they did where people were expressing strong preferences for what you and Mandy have talked about, missing middle, small scale clusters and various things like that. This report also advocates for large apartment buildings. I didn't see that supported by this, you know, on it. It just did density per se. So those are the kind of nuances when it talks about missing middle, to just do one data point. and says there's been a decline. I don't see a decline in production. What I see is an increase in production of large, because we've had a decline in production of single family. So we've got the two ends, large going up, single family going down, and that middle group staying about the same, and we're much higher than the surrounding areas, you know, and the data in the report, they say that Amherst, compared to any of the region, looks great on duplex, triplex, townhouses, condos, you know, all this cluster PERD. So it's tone. And if it's supposed to be our report versus a consultant report, I would like to change some of the wording. If no one shares those concerns, then I can be outvoted. And they think the report is great as is. And I've only completely finished this today, and I'm happy to put it in the packet so others can read what I saw. And if nobody agrees with most of it, then I think we should take a vote and move the report on. But I didn't think I could share this till I finished it. And Nate, I just sent you there's no way you could have read this. So I tried to be as specific on it. So I would say 85% of this report, which is the guts of it, on data, and then even most of the strategy lists, I thought were interesting, and I found them interesting. I just didn't think some of the problem statements were as strongly supported as they could have been. So that's it. You know, and I think, you know, in terms of the projection and our targets, I didn't go back and read the earlier report, but they have given us very big targets that aren't, I think that I would like to address. And they note that one of the ways you get more affordable units is subsidies. So we can only grow the subsidized by either a share of the new units that are being produced with our IZ, you know, that we get 10% every time we produce a big one, or we build more. And we're maxing out, I think, in a good way, with CPAC and all our resources to any time there's an opportunity to build more that has more affordable units, we're doing it. So we've I think a target around the affordable units and whether it's, you know, an increase to 20%, I think those are reasonable. And I wanted to know, Nate, how many have we produced? We don't, you know, in the last 10 years and less, I can't find that in the report. You know, I think we've done a pretty amazing job, and I just don't know what they count. And I think we could set a target that say reproduce what we've done over the last decade in the next decade. So I would find those to be reasonable targets, so that we could measure ourselves up. So I did have some higher level and then page specific. And some of this is a minor change in wording. So that's the question, you know, does this go up to the state, Nate, with the town of Amherst says this is ours and we commission consultants, but we endorse the wording, the language, the lists, and the targets? Or do we, and if we don't want to have the consultants do a lot of work, do we just do some amendments to it? And finally, if everyone but Kathy likes the targets, likes all the wording, but Kathy and a minority, then the report would go forward. So Pat, I agree, you know, if you think all the data is well done, you think the concluding findings match the data, which is where I'm questioning some of the concluding findings, I don't think match the data. I don't think producing more housing, for example, reduces the number of cost burden. The new housing that's being built is very expensive. So if the target is reducing cost burden, what East Hampton just said is we're having wealthier people move in, they bed it up, we lose the middle because there's no way for the middle, the housing that's being built. We've got a lot of expensive housing being produced in Amherst. It's just that middle group. And the report says that the banks won't finance an ADU. They won't finance some of the smaller one. I think that's a major finding, that there's a financial barrier to some of the smaller. It's not highlighted. So so I found the report incredibly interesting and but I have some problems with the conclusions and the executive summary. And I have no idea if this is our report or the consultant's report. I'm finished.
Thank you. So are you comfortable with, before I call on Counselor Haneke for Nate to respond to that question about whose report? Like, how will it, when it comes to the state, will it even have Barrett Consulting?
Yeah, I mean, it's the town's housing production plan, right? So like I said, we would adopt it, but it's Barrett is the one producing it. And so, you know, right now, like, you know, physically, like we don't have the ability to change the report, right? We don't have that document to make those edits. And, you know, when this was going through public comment, we were asking Judy, you know, staff would meet with them and say, well, what do we think is worth changing? Like, you know, how do you view this? And really, it's, you know, it's the consultant's expertise. That's why we selected them through, you know, a public procurement process. And so, you know, if the CRC likes, you know, if the CRC votes and recommends certain changes, we would then go back to Judy and ask them to make those changes. I would not make the changes to this report because, as Judy said, then they would just take their name off of it, right? It's not no longer their report if we're adding our own language, right? This is what they provided and what they, you know, said. Here's our work, right? Here's the consultant's work, and so it's really their work that we're adopting. And so if we, you know, to Kathy's point, if there's things that she really wants to be changed, then we can, you know, I think it's worth discussing with the CRC and taking a vote to see if it's worth, you know, if it moves forward that way. It's not something that staff would change and, you know, and then present it to the state. So if you looked at the report now, I mean, the first page, it says, you know, Barrett Consulting, right? Barrett Planning Group. You know, it's prepared by Barrett Planning Group. And so that's who prepared it.
Okay, thank you. Counselor Haneke.
Yeah, a couple of things. Pat makes a good point. I think we should vote today, however that motion turns out. But thank you, Nate, for that description, because I looked at that first page too, and it makes a lot of sense to me that we hired a consultant, the consultant's producing it, the consultant is the one that's standing by it, and we either say, we're adopting it or we're not, right? You know, if we don't want to adopt what the consultant and their expertise says, then we produce something else to adopt, right? You know, if I make something for another organization, they either accept it or not, but my name doesn't stay on it if they change it to something that me as an expert say doesn't agree with, right? So I think in some sense, I think our options then are recommendations to adopt or recommendations not to adopt, in a sense. To address Kathy's point, I keep going back to the SHI units. So the community need target range and all, because you the rationale for that. I actually see the rationale in here. And it's very confusing. And I will say it's very confusing when it says 700 to 900 total units. Kathy, you know, it does make me think, oh, total housing units, but they're actually referencing state subsidized, state inventory SHI units, 700 to 900 SHI units, not market rate. These are state subsidized housing inventory units. So an Olympia Place, and Nate, I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but an Olympia Place, the building that's going up there wouldn't count towards any of these 700 to 900. They all have to be state subsidized housing inventory qualifying units to go to the 700 or 900. The initial 265 is clear in the report that that's what the EOHLC tells us. Like, there's the rationale for that 265 over the next 5 years. That's what EOHLC says is your minimum target, right? We can't change that number. That's your rationale. The 700 to 900 SHI units is shown because essentially they identified 1,670 households that contain family or elderly members that are cost burdened, either regularly cost burdened, the 30%, or severely cost burdened. An estimated about half of them are severely cost burdened. So 1,600 total, split 50-50 between cost burdened and severely cost burdened. And what they're saying is in the next 5 years, build approximately a number of units that would potentially move half of those households out of cost burdening. That makes sense to me, right? Like if our goal for an affordable housing plan, which even though it's called the housing production plan and makes you think about all housing, is really focused on subsidized housing and affordable housing, big A affordable housing, your goal should be to be minimizing the number of people that are cost burdened. And so you take the households that are cost burdened and say some percentage of that is what we should be aiming to build. So, and this one looks like it's at about 50%. That's a lot. And I'm not going to say it's not a lot. It is a severe, you know, a large increase in our, I mean, I think it would basically double if I am remembering my numbers right in reading this. We have 772 income restricted units right now, and they're asking us as a really high goal to double that number in 5 years. That's a huge goal. But if we talk about aiming to address our affordability crisis in town, I think it's a worthwhile goal to have. And that our goals should be very ambitious. So I think the supports are in there, Kathy, for where those numbers come from. And this is producing housing that would be big A affordable.
Okay, thank you. Dave.
Hi, thanks, everybody. I think this is a great discussion. I apologize. I have to jump to another meeting off out of town hall at 4, but I think it's a great conversation. I too, you know, urge the CRC to vote on this today. I guess what I was gonna add to the conversation was that I think Kathy, you and others have brought up interesting, you know, questions and discussion around this plan. And I guess what I'm urging is that can carry through as part of the public record of adoption of this report. So whatever CRC talks about, if there are questions about the report, that can carry through to the vote by the council. And there's going to be more discussion at the council level if and when this is adopted by the council. And that becomes part of the public record that we can then use and study, and the planning department can explore after the plan is adopted. So that's all I really want to say. I don't think your concerns, even if the council chooses to adopt it as is, which I think is our hope, the public record will still reflect that the council shared the following concerns about data, about X, Y, and Z, whatever those concerns might be. And then it's incumbent upon the planning staff to have the plan move on, but for those concerns to be explored as we move forward with trying to you know, achieve some of the goals outlined in the plan. So that's all I wanted to say, but I've enjoyed the conversation, and I too hope you vote on the plan today. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy.
Just, you know, responding to Mandy, I agree. I'm looking at page 118 and 119 where they set the targets. And I read it as 265 SHI units, meaning the actual unit itself was affordable. And I didn't read 700 to 900 as every one of those units were. So let me just start with, I didn't read it that way. But when I looked at cost burden, as near as I could tell with the math I could get out of the thing, of the cost burden, my guess is about half of them are students. Just because they give you a single person household, they give you a non-family person house. I have no idea if that's true. So I think in Amherst, we've always been, all of our units that open up for families and long-term residents. The UMass students don't qualify for these heavily subsidized units that we have in town. They may qualify for HUD vouchers if they're a long-term resident. So I just think I think I've been curious on how well we did on the last goal. The report talks about what the last goal was and how well we did. I think setting a stretch goal is fine, but we should not set a stretch goal so that's just a comment on that number, Mandy. I did see that what they done, I was interpreting as just this many more units and somehow cost burden would go down. And if the new units are expensive, then the cost burden doesn't go down. They're just more units in town. And the concern that I hear regularly is that we're pricing the middle out, but that more affluent families coming in from a Boston, New York, and other places that see Amherst property as relatively cheap can come in, and some of that, so it's not just students are displacing, but and you know, so that's a concern. So I understand what everyone just said. If we can't change the report, and this is the author's report, it's not ours report, then what I will do, I may say no if we vote today because of my concerns on some of the wording. There's some incredible wording in here. For example, Amherst has emerged as a model for progressive housing policy in the region. The town has actively worked to diversify the housing stock and increase affordability through zoning reform, building capacity, and targeted development. The town has embraced partnerships with regional planning bodies, academic institutions, nonprofit developers to create affordable housing, especially for low income and moderate. That is in the report. It is not in the executive summary. If you read the executive summary, you would think we've not been doing very much. This is on their report, page 6, but page 6 happens to have many pages in. I don't write executive summaries that way when I write a report. I write an executive summary to summarize. So it's a style issue. That is a statement that I think is very true about what Amherst has been doing. And you don't get that flavor. So I am comfortable with putting my way too late set of concerns into the public record, first at CRC, and then I will ask Athena to also put it in the package for the council. But it's that kind of nuance that positions Amherst in a different way than I think what we've been doing. We have innovative zoning on our books that other towns don't have. So it's, you know, and Pat, you can shrug and sigh, but I think not everyone knows how much Amherst has been doing. You know, there's a sense that we just haven't been doing very much. And it's pretty remarkable what we've done, including the partnerships with Valley CDC and Wayfarers and using public land. We have an inventory, which is why we're high, you know, that we're at the target rate or above it already. And we have financial constraints on, I guess we could get to using almost all of the CPAC money. We're getting, some years we're at 80% housing. We could use more, but we don't have municipal ability to give out loans. So it's a tone that has me feel that it doesn't represent Amherst as well. And then some of the statements I think just aren't borne up by data, but that's a lesser concern. It's more this tone. It's missing any point of saying UMass has some responsibility for housing their students. As an example, it just doesn't say that anywhere. It could. But if we can't change it, then I'm voting up and down on this report as representing the Amherst Council view. This counselor will say it doesn't, from my perspective, it doesn't, and I'm willing to be outvoted. And that's fine with me. And
Thank
I
you.
just will put my comments in today's record because no one has had a chance to read it. And then I'll make sure Athena puts it in the council packet since I will have expressed those in public in writing. And I'm not going to read off of my overly long set of comments. I'm finished.
Thank you, Kathy. Counselor Haneke?
Yeah, so one thing I appreciated about the housing production goals, Kathy, is that when they identified the cost burdens, they actually pulled out that 1,600 households cost burden that I mentioned, pulls out what they assume are the student households. So otherwise, as you said, it's over 4,000. So they've created a production goal that is approximately 50% of the current non-student households that are cost burdened.
Okay, so that,
Recognizing that, so that is one of the numbers I actually appreciate, because I agree, if it was 50% of the 4,000 total cost burdened households, that's a different conversation to have. Because cost burdening with there is a different conversation to have when a household for student households that report as cost burdened than non-student households that report as cost burdened. That's not to say we shouldn't also look at student households that report as cost burdened, but I think it's a different conversation and a different way to look at the data. So I did appreciate that they pulled those 2,400 houses that they suspect are mostly occupied by student households out of what they determined were their production goals, their very ambitious production goals. So I'm happy to make a motion if people want a motion at this point or whenever they want.
I'll call a Nate before I make my comment.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I was gonna say, just Kathy, you've asked a few times about kind of how did we do with the last plan? And, though we've produced, a fair number of affordable units, it's over 100, it's, it doesn't meet the goals and it doesn't meet the needs of the community. And so, it is a slow moving process. So we have our inclusionary zoning, which can be 10% of certain developments. And then there's comprehensive permits where it could be 20 or 25% or more of the units, a minimum of 20 or 25%. I think the town's done a pretty good job of encouraging those public-private, kind of partnerships on town-owned land, and we have market rate development. But I think, to me, when I read that report and kind of what the planning board has been discussing is, how we've been missing housing production for different household types, income levels, and different housing types. And so, to me, that's the conversation you'd have after you adopt it. But the planning board's already kind of talking about, okay, how could we maybe change zoning or regulations to encourage different kind of housing in Amherst? So if we don't want, if the concern is, well, we allow a lot of apartment buildings, well, is there a way to allow smaller apartment buildings? Or is there a way to allow smaller lots to maybe get 0 lot line townhomes that could be owned in a fee simple structure as opposed to condominium? Whatever. So the Housing and Zoning Subcommittee has been talking about it at the planning board, but I think to me what the report has shown is that there's a need for different income levels and different housing types in town. To me, should UMass house more students on campus, that's a value statement that I don't think the consultant would make either way. I don't think they'd say they should house more or less. It just is what it is. I think the reality is that the UMass puts a lot of pressure. The number of students in Amherst in the region puts a lot of pressure on the housing market. And so, they don't tell us how to manage that. They have some ideas. They say we have to, address that kind of demographic in that part of the housing market. And there's probably a few different ways to do it. And one may be encouraging more housing on campus. But, that's the discussion I think we'd have after this plan gets adopted, is how do we address that part of the housing market? And how do we address the other parts of the housing market? How do we address senior housing? How do we address that missing middle? There's attainable housing. So, there's capital A affordable and there's lowercase a affordable. And I think both those need to be addressed to have, different household types in town. And again, Amherst can't do it all, right? It's a regional problem, but the plan focuses on Amherst. I think, as conversations move forward, Hadley has a pretty recent housing production plan, and it could be worthwhile. There's a regional housing meeting through PVPC that meets once a month, and it's hit or miss who attends. But Belchertown attends. I attend for Amherst. Hadley will sometimes attend, and maybe we have to have a more concerted effort about what are we doing, in certain housing markets. But that becomes a regional conversation, and it's really hard to have regulations and a plan that addresses that. So this is the Amherst plan, but I think it can then talk to what we do as a region or with other constituents.
Can I just make not as the chair, but as a member, just to make a comment? Well, thank you, Nate. So my question is, are you saying that we really have to just vote up and down? I thought we did have an opportunity for some comments. For myself personally, I tried to get them really pare it down to just a couple. And my concern is where I feel like there's editorializing happening, that I don't know needs to be there. So, but one more that's not editorial, but like on page 28 of 32, this is like one of, I got it down to like 3. It says encourage the development of student housing. And then it, goes on to talk about home ownership and rental opportunities for year-round residents. Could it just say encourage home ownership and rental opportunities for year-round residents? My concern about encouraging the development of student housing, I've said this before, but I don't understand why it's in a report about affordable housing. I mean, it's like having our head in the sand. We know that's not affordable housing, even for students, many times. And we don't need to encourage the development. I just don't know why it's there. Like, I'd feel better if those 3, 5 words were taken out. And then there's just a couple of other pretty minor, but where I thought there was editorializing that wasn't appropriate. So that's just, and I guess my question is there any opportunity for that to be communicated? And then I would like to, personally, I would like to see Kathy's comments, but I think then the vote today, we move on to, do we want to wait till the next meeting to see Kathy's comments that just came in before we vote to refer to adopt or not adopt, or adopt with amendments? So I think we have to vote on whether we want to see what Kathy submitted, or if we just want to proceed to a vote today on adopting or not adopting. But my question to you, Nate, is there any opportunity for any word changes?
Yeah, I think at the last meeting, Mandy suggested it, it would say it could be a vote of the CRC in terms of the recommendations, or, do we include them as part of the record to town council, and then they could look at them as well. So Jennifer, if you had, those other additional comments, it all can be forwarded on to town council. So, Pam had submitted some previously. And so to me, all of that is part of the public record, or do you take them and say, okay, here are the 5 comments we want changed? To me, to change the tone of the report is a pretty big deal. And and the consultant might be like, well, that's how I write. I don't know. The student piece, I think, they could say, to me, it's like, I don't want to have to be, defending their work, but I feel like they could say, well, the students are a really big part of the market. Why would you just not mention it, and not mention that you need more student housing as well as other types of housing? And so, to me, it doesn't really say anything about who does it or where or how, but I think it's important to mention that. And staff actually told them to mention the students, right? So in Hadley, they kind of were silent on student housing. And South Hadley talked about it. They have a really nice housing production plan, and they talked about some of the other markets there. But to me, it's just part of the market. They're not necessarily capitally affordable housing, but it's part of the housing market. So I think it's important to acknowledge what kind of pressures, that demographic puts. So if, to me, it would be, does the CRC want to vote up or down, or do they want to vote up or down with possible amendments? And so some of it would be, what does the CRC think are those possible amendments? Is it the tone? Is it, certain data points or pages that need to be changed? And, I've taken a few notes, but I feel like we'd have to kind of solidify those amendments if that's what we want, if the CRC would want to vote with those. Right. So, page, like you said, like maybe specific pages, or, right, improve the executive summary by adding, kind of a better synopsis of what Amherst has done, and what we, where we are, and then, pulling in a few more data points. So maybe the executive summary needs 3 more paragraphs to make it a better executive summary. I mean, I'm just, I'm not saying either way, but that's to me what the CRC would need to, if you want to do, that's how the process could work, is those are the amendments that could be part of the recommendation.
So again, my question, encourage the development of more student housing, which is not like that I mean, my concern is that that will not be affordable housing. So I think that could have been maybe couched differently, because that means every time a large apartment that's priced for students go up, we can say we're fulfilling the mandate of our housing production plan, which is supposed to be building more affordable housing. So that's my concern. We can point to that and say, we're doing what the housing production plan said, even though we're building way more units of what's really not affordable. And we're carrying out the mandate of a plan that's supposed to help us get more affordable units. But I will move on to, you've heard me say that before, to Kathy.
Okay, so I have just one topic to ask about, Nate. Nowhere in the report does it talk about the infrastructure cost implications of housing, of expanded housing. Whether it's police, fire, roads, that you need to have a municipal capacity to support densification and more people, because I think the report is saying Amherst wants to be bigger than 40,000 people. I mean, that's the way I would read this. We would love people to move into Amherst. And there's one point it even says, make it an attractive place for all the surrounding towns for people to come, even though the population projections are flat for the whole region. So we would like to be attractive. And I have a problem with that type of wording because part of the reason people aren't living in Amherst is that the tax rates are lower and you can have a house, same kind of house at a lower rate if you live just outside us and still come and work in Amherst. But in any case, does the mention of infrastructure costs ever come into a housing production plan? I just found it absent when they talk about capacity, that the town has restricted budget and municipal capacity to support even densification. Is that usually never mentioned? So it's a question. No one ever mentions that housing comes with associated municipal costs. It's certainly an issue in New York and others that have densified, and they didn't necessarily densify and get more affordable. They densified and got more public things. So is it always absent is my question. And I see Greg's hand is up because that was a concern I had, and maybe it's just never in one of these reports.
Yeah, I mean, Greg can answer too. I was going to say that's outside the scope of this, is really looking at kind of those costs. So it does reference, infrastructure capacity, and if there's the ability of Amherst to, accommodate more units. I think the cost of that is it's really not typically a part of this, and so that's, to me, again, that's like next level. Okay, we're thinking about increasing density in this part of town. What does that mean? Is the water and sewer infrastructure in place? Does it have to be replaced? Is it not big enough? Do we need a pump station? All those things are outside the scope of this plan. This plan is really, looking at, numbers and saying, here's what we see. And then it's the town's decision of where do we put it, right? So it does say it's cheaper typically to put it near existing infrastructure, but maybe that infrastructure is old and outdated, but there's no way they'd even hazard a guess at that, right? Like, that's just, but it's something that, right, I think as part of the conversation, it's worth having, but it's not something we would ask the consultants to put a metric on.
Okay. Were you speaking, Kathy?
No.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Greg?
Yeah, I think just referring to the report, the consultants did speak with folks in the DPW about what we might think of as sort of the capital side of infrastructure. So things like sewers and roads, and especially really sewers and water capacity, and got largely a green light on the whole, right? Like there wasn't the folks at DPW did not express that we're constrained on these core utility services. As far as the cost of more program oriented services, whether it's policing or fire or whatever. I think that's, as Nate said, it's kind of outside the scope. But I think certainly on the production side, that would the hope would be that that new growth would come with new revenue as well and pay for it. And I think specifically when the sort of general process that I understand most communities use with this is, and getting into some of these strategies, that's probably where a lot of those conversations will become more in depth, so if there's, a strategy around, pick a selection of town to upzone, say, okay, I think when we're at the juncture of that strategy discussion, I think then it becomes, okay, what are the districts where we have existing infrastructure capacity versus where might it be short on infrastructure? And I think that's a more detailed conversation, strategy by strategy. It's kind of hard to sort of address the whole thing, I think.
Okay. Thank you. Counselor Haneke?
I find it strange that there's an objection to the goal of encouraging the development of student housing while preserving home ownership and rental opportunities for year-round residents. Because many people in this town want student housing development in certain parts of the town, i.e. on the university campus, and we can debate where it should go, but there are a lot of people arguing for student housing development on UMass's campus in order to preserve home ownership and rental opportunities for year-round residents. So, that goal, and it is listed as a goal, is under managing shifting demographics. With a problem of the demographic of makeup of the town is evolving with a declining number of family households with children and a growing housing demand among senior residents and off-campus students. And so it makes perfect sense to me to, within that category, mention a goal of the juncture of student housing development for preserving home ownership and rental, because in my 7 years on the council, a number of counselors and also residents that don't agree with me have argued for exactly that development of student housing in a particular area, add that parenthetical, in order to preserve home ownership and rental opportunities for year-round residents. So I don't understand the objection to that goal. I do understand if that goal said something like encourage the development of student housing in downtown while preserving home ownership, then I would absolutely understand a portion of this community objecting to that. I really would. But the generalness of this goal that does not indicate where to develop student housing, which is really the debate in my mind that has been going on in town, is the location of developing student housing. But this goal does not say a location. Yet otherwise, without that location, to me, it actually accurately depicts the goals of nearly everyone that I've talked to regarding housing in this town. So I guess I don't quite understand the objection to having that as a goal when you read the entire goal.
So can I respond actually, just because I think you make a good point? So could, on page 28 of 32, literally, I would be just fine if it said, encourage the development of student housing, 3 words, including on campus. I mean, I think, because I've actually heard from a number of residents, I think they do, when you read it, just assume it's talking about not on campus. So if it could say including on campus, or include, however, 3 words, I think that would really, I'd be just fine with that. Because I think that's not how it's being understood. So that's a fair point. Can we have that kind of a change? or ask the consultants? I guess I'm directing.
So can I ask a question from Jennifer? Because you
I'm sorry, I
referred
just
to
went
a
off.
page-
Would something like that be appropriate?
Yeah. Can I just ask a question so I can see what we're referring to? I was on page 116 of the document, which was like 130 something of the full 215, because the numbers don't match up. Where are you referencing?
Oh, okay. I'm actually, well, it's in the report, but you're right. I'm referencing what's in our packet. I guess it's the slideshow that.
Okay. Because I was like 28, either 28
Yeah.
doesn't have that at all. So
Right,
it's
so
a
that
goal.
is what I'm
So
referencing.
it probably is the goal that I found on 116.
Yeah. I
Okay.
think those 3 words would make a difference. Not saying it has to be, but just including.
Yeah, I mean, so the report references student housing in a few sections, and on page 101, they have a student housing section, and they talk about, that many residents, argue the university has a greater responsibility to have housing on campus, and there's some barriers to that, but that is a part of the conversation. I mean, if the CRC really thinks it's worth asking the consultant to change that goal, you can vote on it. To me, I think it's splitting hairs, and that's something that we would do after. If to me, that's part of the conversation. What do we do with student housing? It's I don't, the consultant might say, well, why don't you want them off campus? There's benefits to having them off campus. There's benefits to having them on campus. So, like I said, I don't think it's a reasonable thing to say that either way. I think that's part of the conversation the town needs to have about where we want to house students. It's a value statement that the consultant, they haven't said either way, right? Because I think they're agnostic to that point. They just think we have to address student housing as part of the housing market. And so that's the conversation we have locally about what we want to do with the students.
I can call myself. I mean, I can make that suggestion in the council. I don't think that's how that is interpreted when it says encourage student housing. And I'm not saying it has to say only on campus, just including on campus, but I can raise that in the council also. So are we, so I just throw this out here. Do we want to move to a vote to approve or approve, or vote on whether we want to, I'm just wondering if we need the step of voting on whether we want to wait another week till we can see Kathy's comments, or vote on that first and then vote, or just go directly to a vote on whether we want to take a vote for the council. Councilor Haneke.
I'm gonna make a motion. I move to recommend the council adopt the June 2025 housing production plan that was prepared for the town of Amherst by Barrett Planning Group LLC.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Okay, then we will move to a vote. I'm just going to do it as I see, as you appear on my screen. Pat.
Aye.
Kathy.
Okay, I have a question to our parliamentarian. If I abstain because I like part of the report and don't like part of it, does that reduce the voting members to 3, Mandy?
So I
You know,
think in recommendations, it's just I mean, I think Athena would know better. I think for recommendation motions, it's a vote of those present and voting, not just present. It's still just a recommendation, though.
Then I'm going to abstain.
Councilor Haneke.
Aye.
Well, I'm going to throw a wrench in. I'd like to see Kathy's comments, so I will vote no. So where does that leave us? That would leave us 2 in favor, 1 abstention, 1 no. And Athena's not here. So Mandy, Councilor Haneke? Is that
So
a
I mean,
majority?
I think it passes.
I do too.
And the reason I'll have explained the reason I did it. I don't think a longer discussion at this committee will be productive, given what I've heard. So to the extent we want to even include a cover memo on the report that we cannot change as a council, that could be discussed at the council level. And I can click the button and share my comments. And I have sent them to Nate and now to Greg which I understand are woefully late. I just didn't find the bandwidth to do it sooner. So, Mandy, that's what I was thinking, that 2-1 with an abstention means this is moving out of this committee. And
Yeah, I
I'm okay
figured
with-
that's what it meant too.
and I'm okay with it. That is that is actually my motivation for abstaining, as opposed to I don't have an opinion. I do have an opinion, but it doesn't look like I can do anything about my opinion. So I will move it forward. So we don't have to look at this again.
Counselor Haneke.
So I wonder if, I don't know what's gonna happen on the November 5th meeting, but normally reports are just drafted by the chair and sent in without coming to committee. They sometimes, depending on the report, get sent to members for comments before the chair finalizes it, right? It's been a good conversation, I think, but I think there's a lot of nuance to some of the results of the conversation, I would say. You know, things like that Nate and Greg and Dave said about whose report is it? What happens if we change it? Then it's not, you know, like then Barrett might, you know, things like that. But that the council would benefit from hearing or having a report that includes that nuance, as well as some of the specific comments that you, Jennifer, and Kathy, and even Pam have had to the whole thing. So I don't know whether that means that would it be logical for that report to sort of be discussed or presented to the committee at the next meeting, or, you know, I'm just throwing this out there before it goes to council, or just make sure that the report is sent to all committee members for comment before it's finalized by the chair or vice chair, whoever's actually going to draft this report. You know, I know sometimes they do get sent, sometimes they don't. And I normally don't have a problem either way. I'm not criticizing the sending or non-sending of reports. When I was chair, I rarely sent them to the committee. But this might be a case where giving the committee a chance to comment before finalized would be helpful.
Kathy.
Mandy, I like what I understood to be your second option, not to bring it back to the committee to focus on the report, but to do, just so everyone knows, what we have always done in finance, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the report gets changed. As we said, here's the draft. Everyone sends any comments to whoever wrote the draft, and that person incorporates those. And sometimes you get them from, you know, someone is just as factual, but does a good faith effort to bring them in terms of you didn't capture this right or you misstated, and then that final goes out. So I like that version, Mandy, rather than having to have a formal discussion of a draft. And since Jennifer is here today, the burden goes on her shoulders to draft a report that tries to capture some of what we heard from both Greg and Nate. And it can be as simple as Jennifer had one specific or something else, and Kathy submitted a report on comments that none of us had a chance to read. You know, it can be, you know, in other words, it can be an honest version of, you're getting this report from us with this vote. And I think that, for me, that works because everyone gets a chance for the nuance. If other people are with it, and it's so explicit, it comes as draft, and then it gives people a time to ponder what the report says to be. It should be neutral. It's a chair report on our discussion, right? Including
and
Nate and Greg's contribution that we heard from staff, right?
yeah, the TSO chair always sends the report and actually asks us to give him his blessing, you know, before it's posted. But I would not feel comfortable submitting that without all of you seeing it. So I will get it to you a week before it goes to the next council meeting. Yeah, so I think it was a good discussion. Thank you. Thank you, Greg and Nate. So we just have minutes, so we can give you back your time. But thank you very much. And thank you for being here through the whole discussion. on
For
the
sure.
housing
Thank-
production plan.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
So I'd say this would be the start of the discussion. So, as I mentioned, I'd like to have, future meetings with the planning board, CRC and Housing Trust, whether it could be, combined meetings to really talk about how we move some of the housing goals and strategies forward. So even different things that aren't, say, mentioned in the plan, but, I think in the next few months, I'd like to have some of these conversations that the planning board started and we have here. So.
Yeah, well, you've been good diplomats between the Barrett and us.
I like that idea, Nate, of bringing the three together. It would
I do
make more
too.
sense to bring whatever the new CRC constituted committee
right,
is so early next year. But I really like that idea of all three maybe being able to talk about which strategies to focus on.
Yeah, that'd be great. Okay, thank you very much, Greg and
Thanks.
Nate.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Night. So our next item is to approve minutes, which weren't in the packet, so I'm assuming they have been there in past packets. Pat,
If they're not there, then we can't approve them.
we can't, so
So that's done.
that's that, because there are actually 4 minutes here. Okay, and carryover items we discussed last week, and I will leave that, I think, till the chair comes back.
And I think we're attempting not to have solar be a carryover item. So-
Yes.
Well, I
Yeah.
think solar will be a carryover item, but it will be a holding until the guidelines are final, the regs are finalized.
Right.
But not a like big lift carryover, I think is the goal.
But Mandy, I do appreciate what you said about the student housing, because it helped me clarify my concern. And at least we know this won't be on the carryover. The housing production plan won't be on the carryover items. Okay, so with that, our next meeting is November
Six, I think it's the
November
sixth.
6th.
November
Yeah, I will not be
6th.
there. Just an
Oh,
FYI.
that's right, because Kathy will come back with the solar bylaw report. Okay, is there a motion to adjourn? God, we're ending early.
I'll
So
move
moved.
that. So
Second.
moved.
Second,
Okay, Pat,
Aye.
Counselor Haneke,
Aye.
Kathy,
yes.
and I'm an aye. Okay, thank you. We're adjourned.